Hello once again, dear children. I'm now doing some application questions on speciation. Just to repeat about speciation, my dear children, this is a process by which a new species is formed, and that is because you have a geographical barrier. You got to know what is a geographical barrier. The geographical barrier that separates a population into two subpopulations, like population A and B, and then how natural selection occurs independently in the environments, and they become genotypically and phenotypically different from each other. So if you look here, the river is there. In life sciences, my darlings, taking time off to read your question is of paramount importance. Reading the question carefully and taking note of important things by underlining them. When I say underlining them, for example, this river. Sorry, baby. If you want to underline, there's the river. The river was there in that particular area. And then there's gene flow, means there's reproduction occurring. Now, reproduction can only occur if you are of the same species. So there must have been one species here. Remember, a population is organisms of the same species. So there's this one population and a population of rabbit. So there's one species of this population, okay? And then what happened? There must have been some huge flood or something where the river now changed its course and flowed downwards, separating your original population into population A and population B. Are you with me? So a landslide occurred, huge flooding, a landslide occurred, and the river changed its direction. So the original population became split into two. Then natural selection occurred independently in both of those environments. Now, if you look here, papas, this one stayed the same. If it stayed the same, most probably it's in the same environment. But the change occurred here in this population, in population B, because it was a totally new environment. So natural selection occurred here, and they became genotypically and phenotypically different from the other population. Are you with me? They became genotypically and phenotypically different, such that if you had to remove the barrier and put it back to where it was, so you took the river, changed its course, they would never mate with each other because they now are two different species. They are now two different species. So this species is completely different from that one. They are now two different species. This is speciation. So let's undo that, yeah. What do they say? Use the information below to explain how a new species of rabbit has arisen because of a geographical barrier. 9 marks. You're never going to find 9 marks in a particular question, my darlings. But let's look at how they got the answer out here. Am I missing something, boo-boos? What question was that? Oh, no. That was your MTG. So just look at what they have to say here. A population of rabbits becomes split by the river. I would have said by the river. Don't say geographical barrier when you know what the barrier is, because a mark is given for saying what the barrier is. As a result, the two parts of the population cannot interbreed. In other words, there is no gene flow. Cannot interbreed is 1 mark. There is no gene flow, 1 mark. Natural selection occurs independently in each population due to different environmental conditions. As a result, the two populations become genotypically and phenotypically different from each other. Even if the geographical barrier is removed, in this case, river returns to its normal course, the rabbits will not be able to interbreed again. We say that one or both parts of the rabbit population have become a new species. Okay, good. Let's look at one more question on this here before I look at the concept of natural selection. Evolution in present day form, my babies. Sorry, let me just undo this here. Okay, let's look at some of the questions here in this particular booklet. Okay, let's see if we've done the others. Oh, there's lots of other questions here. Well, let's look at punctuated equilibrium before I come to this here. Question 8, remember we just did question 7. Remember punctuated equilibrium, we said there are long periods of time where there's little or no change, followed by a short period of time where there's a rapid, drastic change. And this is when a new species is formed in a short period of time. And this is supported by a lack of transitional fossils as evidence. What did the question say? Read the extract below. The red-bellied black snake, sometimes when they give you all these scientific terms, they just confuse you. Please, you don't even have to read those scientific terms, neither must you try and pronounce it, especially not under exam conditions. A red-bellied black snake and the green tree snake are predators that sometimes feed on cane toads. So both of them, snakes that feed on cane toads, these are frogs that contain a toxin that may kill them. So they feed on a frog. Well, a frog and a toad is different, isn't it? So boo-boos. But we'll just call the toad a frog for you to picture them, that contains a toxin that may kill them. So they go to eat this here, and stupidly, that thing can kill them. Now, the snakes consume the toads by swallowing them whole. They just put them into their mouths and swallow them. And then they'll use the contortions of their bodies, perhaps, will now help in digesting them, breaking them up and then digest them. A decrease in the average jaw size of the snakes has been observed over a period of 70 years. Not a long period of time, isn't it, so loose? But you're seeing a decrease in the average jaw size. Now, as I said to you before, just highlight things that they're talking about. So there is a decrease in the size of the jaws. So something has happened where you find that initially they had a certain size of jaws. Now there's a decrease in the size of the jaws. Some scientists believe that this may be an example of punctuated equilibrium because 70 years is a short period of time. You know, couldn't have been Darwin's natural selection. So that means a change occurred in a very short period of time. Maybe an example of punctuated equilibrium. With this change, it was also noticed that snakes could no longer swallow the large cane toad. So those of them with a small jaw size could not swallow the large cane toads. So that's an advantage or a disadvantage, papas? Of course it would be an advantage because if they swallowed it, they would die because they're poisonous, isn't that so? This has resulted in an increase in the survival of the snakes. There we go. Everything that we've spoken about, you would see more information appears in the sentence thereafter. And as I said to you, every bit of information in life sciences leads you to an answer. Okay, so let's remove all of this here. Of course, in your books, it will stay, but this is my movable book, so I'll have to change it. Okay, darlings? Good. Now let's look. Define punctuated equilibrium for 3 marks. What characteristic of the code species protects it from predation? You would know the answer by now. Isn't that so? It's got those small jaws. Explain how the change, of course, we saw that if they got a small jaw, they cannot swallow it whole. They would not be poisoned by the toxin. How would Lamarck have explained the development of small jaw size in the snakes? How? You know? So Lamarck would have said, what would he have said? Because he doesn't speak about variation. Isn't that so? So let's see how Lamarck would have answered this question, number 8. So what is punctuated equilibrium? It is characterized by long periods of time where there's little or no change, alternating with short periods of rapid change during which new species may form. Okay? So what is the advantage is that they contain toxins which could kill the snakes. Therefore, it's an advantage for them not to eat them. Having a small jaw means cane toads cannot be consumed. thereby protecting the snakes from ingesting the toxins and dying. What would Lamarck have said? Since the snake jaws were used less and less, the snake developed small jaws. So they had big jaws, and because they were not used, look at how confusing it is to a child, my babies. Would I have come up with the answer? Quite frankly, I don't know, but I would have used what Lamarck had said, that if you use something less and less and less, it becomes smaller until it finally disappears. In this case, it can't disappear. So go back and look at what is the theory you know and try and apply that theory. So he would have said, since the snake jaws were used less, the snakes developed smaller jaws. This characteristic was now inherited by the offspring. That's the acquired characteristic that is inherited. And over many generations, the jaw of the snake became smaller. Would I have got 4 marks, babies? No. I'll be quite frank, I would never have got 4 marks for that. Okay? So there are questions that can really test you, and these are your level 4 questions. Okay? Good. Let's look at the next question. We did the little elephant. I like this question here. I want to look at it. Describe how Lamarck and Darwin explain evolution straightforward and compare Darwin's ideas to the ideas of punctuated equilibrium. Now remember, Darwin said there's small changes over long periods of time, isn't that so? While punctuated equilibrium said there are long periods where there are no changes, and then there are short periods of time where there are rapid changes. Okay? So this is evolution according to Lamarck. You'll explain his 2 laws in inverted commas and write about it. Darwin's theory, organisms produce a lot. This is a generic version of Darwin's theory of evolution. Organisms produce a large number of offspring. There's variation. Some have favorable characteristics, some do not. When there's a change in environment, organisms with favorable characteristics survive, while organisms with less favorable characteristics die. This is called natural selection. Organisms that survive reproduce and pass the favorable characteristic or the favorable allele to their offspring. The next generation will have a higher proportion of individuals with the favorable characteristic. And as you have subsequent generations, you would find that more and more of them, in fact, all of them would have the favorable characteristic, my darling. Okay. Now, Darwin's idea, his is called gradualism, isn't that so, babies? Because they are gradual, very slow and small changes occurring over a long period of time. So Darwin believed that evolution takes place through an accumulation of small, gradual changes that occur over a long period of time, supported by transitional fossils. This is like so country, Papa. They say Darwin's is supported by transitional fossils, and then punctuated equilibrium is supported by a lack of transitional fossils. No? Punctuated equilibrium suggests that evolution sometimes involves long period of time where there's no change or very little change, alternating with short period of times where there are rapid changes. New species are formed in a short period of time, supported by the absence of transitional fossils. What are they actually giving you in the news is that they're just telling you what is Darwin's theory and what's punctuated equilibrium. That's what they're saying, and that's what they expected in the essay. Babies, all right? Good. Let's look at this question 12. Lots of new, nice questions, okay? And remember, in your trial examination this year only, they'll be focusing a lot on your general evolution and no questions on human evolution. So that's, I want to spend a lot of time on general evolution just for this year. Of course, if you're listening to this next year, if your friends are listening to this, this won't apply for next year. But the COVID year has granted you a decrease in the information that is required for your trial examination. So let's do a lot on general evolution. Okay. Question 12. Study the extract and information below. Always read your question 2 or 3 times over. That is why reading time is so important in life sciences. A species of clover plant, once again, don't try and pronounce those scientific names. A species of clover plant developed a mutation. Now, you will learn about evolution in modern day times. Evolution in modern day times is happening right now, where you find that species are now becoming different from each other, from what the original species was, because the environment has changed so drastically. And one of the things that the environment has brought on mutations. And mutations, my darlings, is a change in the DNA, which will confer a favorable characteristic to an organism. Sometimes a mutation may confer an unfavorable characteristic and cause the organism to die. But if we're looking at mutation supporting evolution, it is where mutation brings upon a favorable characteristic. So there's a change in the DNA, and the DNA will now bring about a new characteristic in the organism. Are you with me? So a species of clover plant developed a mutation that caused a poison cyanide to form in the plant cells. Oh my God, none of you would even think of taking cyanide because it's a highly dangerous poison that can kill you. Okay? And I think it affects your nerve system. So this clover plant actually has got cyanide in its leaves. So if you had to eat this clover plant, my darlings, you would die. Now, why would they want to develop this? This gives the clover a bitter taste to the herbivores that feed on them. So the herbivores will not feed on them. So it's a natural protective mechanism. However, in a colder climate, some cells burst, releasing the cyanide into the plant tissues, thereby killing the plants. So if the cyanide is contained inside the plant cells, it's okay. But once it's released, it'll start to poison the rest of the tissues. And then the whole plant will die in cold conditions. So much of information in a short paragraph like this. Let's see what they got to ask you about. Scientists observed that there were more clover plants of this species in warmer areas. Of course, in colder areas, they kill themselves, isn't it so? They kill themselves by cells bursting and the cyanide being released. They formulated a hypothesis that more clover plants survive at higher temperatures. It would be a logical conclusion, isn't that so? A logical hypothesis, sorry. You can only make a conclusion after you do a study and test a hypothesis. So their hypothesis would be more clover plants survive at higher temperatures, or few clover plants survive at colder temperatures. Now you test it. You test the hypothesis to see whether this could be possibly right. They conducted the investigation on the survival of clover plants at different temperatures. So temperatures becomes our independent variable. It is the one thing that is now different. They placed 200 clover plants. Oh, let's go. Now we're looking at investigations, isn't that so? Theory about investigation. If we say, sorry, my darling, if we say 200 clover plants, that's a large sample size. So we're looking at reliability. No, you didn't do it with 2 or 3, 200. With the temperature controlled at 5 degrees and 200 clover plants at 25 degrees. So you've got two groups of them. One at a very low temperature, one at a higher temperature. They controlled all other variables. Of course, these clover plants must be of the same species. Everything else must be the same. In other words, the soil in which they're growing, the light intensity, the amount of water that was given. Everything else must be the same. They allowed a period of time for the plants to grow and counted the number of clover plants that survive in each greenhouse. That's what you would do as well, isn't it? So if you were checking this out, whether clover plants survived at higher temperatures. Then they calculated the percentage survival of clover plants. At 5 degrees, 13% survived, and at 25 degrees, 72% survived. So let's see what the questions would be like. State the independent variable and dependent variable. What was the one thing that they changed? They changed the temperature. Dependent variable would be the number of clover plants that survive. State two ways in which they could have improved the reliability. How could they have improved the reliability, my darlings? Of course, they had a large sample. If you wanted to be a larger sample, okay, but very importantly, babies, repeat the investigation. Repeat the investigation. All right, just don't do it once and come up to a conclusion. Repeat the investigation. What do you think would be the other one? No? What do you think would be the other one? We'll look at that just now. Okay, darlings? All right. You think about it. How could the validity, oh, sorry, baby, am I looking at the right one? No. Describe how scientists calculated the percentage survival of the clover. Percentage survival, babies, if you had 200, let's say you had 200. Sorry, babies. If you had 200 and like 20 survived. So it'll be, how would you calculate the percentage survival? It'll be 20 divided by 200 times, there's times here, babies. Okay, there's time, times 100. Isn't that so? That's how you get the percentage. That's how you get what's a percentage survival. Okay? How many that survived over the total that you had. Okay. Explain why, if the hypothesis would be accepted or rejected. Of course, you found that more of them survived at warmer temperatures. Therefore, the hypothesis would be accepted. But how did they get the 3 marks? We'll come back to that. Based on information in the passage apart from temperature, explain one other way in which the survival rate of clover plants is increased. Based on information apart from temperature, explain one other way in which the survival rate of clover plants is increased. So, one other way, let's see, based on information in the passage. Let's go back to the passage, darlings. Let's go back to the passage. Sorry. We'll go back to the passage and find out one other way. Where are you, darling? How? They placed in a greenhouse. Are you with me? And in a greenhouse, you control all other variables. But maybe I'm wrong, babies. Remember I told you, you always go back to the passage to find out whether you're right or wrong. Refer to Darwin's theory of natural selection and explain how the mutation affected the survival of clover plants at lower temperatures. There we go. So the change in the environment would be that mutation that occurred, isn't that so? And the mutation would allow, what happens? At lower temperatures, you would find that those clover plants would release their toxins to the other tissues, cause them to die, isn't that so? Causing those plants not to survive at lower temperatures. But how would we get 6 marks, babies? How would we get 6 marks? Let's look at it. Temperature, that was the independent factor. This was a dependent factor. Repeat the investigation. Set up more greenhouses at each temperature. Use a larger sample. Remember I told you got 200? Perhaps you can use a larger sample. Okay, so we got repeat the investigation. We got use an even larger sample than 200. Set up more greenhouses at each temperature. That would be like almost like repeating. Okay. How would you calculate the percentage survival? They counted the number of clover plants that survived, divided by the original number 200 times 100. Just mathematics. Hypothesis will be accepted because there are more clover plants that survive at higher temperature. We thought, how do you get the 3 marks? But that's so easy to get the 3 marks. (12.5), I don't remember the question, darling. Based on information apart from temperature. Wow. Explain one other way in which the survival of clover plants increased. Wow, you saw I got it completely wrong. They said the bitter taste of the cyanide in the clover plant prevented herbivores from feeding on them. To me, I would never have said that thing. Because, my darlings, where were the herbivores in the greenhouse? For me, I still pictured it in the greenhouse. And if you picture it out of the greenhouse, terrific, you do better than me in the examination. Are you with me? So, the last one, how would Darwin have spoken about it? He would have said mutation caused the variation. Some produce cyanide, others do not produce cyanide. The cyanide producing plants are killed at lower temperatures. The non-cyanide producing plants survived at lower temperatures, reproduced, and the allele for cyanide production is now passed on to the next generation, decreasing the number of cyanide producing clover plants in the next generation. Is not passed, sorry. The non-cyanide producing plants, wow, would I have got this right or wrong, my darlings? The mutation caused variation. Some produce cyanide, others do not produce cyanide. Do you see that, babies? Do you see that? The cyanide producing plants are killed at lower temperatures. The non-cyanide producing plants survive at lower temperatures and reproduce. The allele for cyanide production is not passed to the next generation because they died, decreasing the number of cyanide producing clover plants. Let me go back to the question and explain how the mutation affected the survival of clover plants at lower temperatures. Wow. That was the answer. That was the answer. I would have had a totally different spin on it. Are you with me? But here they wanted you to know that the non-cyanide producing ones would be the ones that will survive, and the cyanide producing ones were the ones that will die. Did they state at low temperatures? Yes. So because they stated at lower temperatures, you had to be able to apply that lower temperatures one to Darwin's theory of natural selection, where at lower temperatures, the mutation occurred, causing them to produce cyanide. And those that produce cyanide, my darlings, would die. Those that do not produce cyanide were the ones that survived. Would I have got 6 out of 6? No. I would have failed as a level 4 student, a student who can answer level 4 questions, because this is a typical level 4 questions. And that is why we say that most of the difficult questions come from evolution. I hope this has been an eye-opener to you, my darlings. Okay? And ponder on this here and go through as many questions as possible so that should you come across a similar question in the future, you'd be able to answer it. With that being said, my darlings, God bless you until I meet you again.